Alright, so in this lesson, this appended lesson, I know I said in an earlier lesson that we wouldn't actually take a look at our animation shelf simply because there were too many tools. But I'm going to go ahead and give you an appended lesson here and give you at least a general overview of our animation module inside of Maya. Now, let me go ahead here and switch to our animation shelf, and you can see that these icons are probably foreign to a lot of people, but they're fairly easy to understand, and also that the rigging system and animation system in Maya are fairly powerful. They're not only powerful in terms of the actual animation that you can do, but in terms of modeling, they can also be fairly powerful as well. Okay, so the main thing that we're going to take a look at here are some of the main tools for the animation. So let's just jump up here to our animate tab, and we're not necessarily going to look like I said look through all of these. I'll just give you some of the main ones here, and you can obviously take a look at set key. Set key is mainly for setting keys for animation, and you can see where the hotkey shortcut is going to be S. So let's say that you wanted to do some basic animation, and if we moved our model and hit S, you can see where it's going to set keyframes for that animation. And if I go ahead here and turn on our timeline, you can see where it's going to put a little red bar here indicating that it's already set a key for animation. Okay, so let's just go ahead and jump back a few steps there, and if you wanted to go ahead and move that back, you could simply set a key for one, just move the timeline, set a key again, okay, move the timeline, set a key, and then you have some basic animation inside of your scene. Let's go ahead and just jump back a few steps there so we can take that animation off. I'm going to turn my timeline off here. The rest of these are probably a little bit too advanced, so let's come up here and take a look at our deformers tab. Now, in terms of animation, or whether you're rigging a character, specifically a face is probably a better example. You're going to use blend shapes no matter what you do, simply because the blend shapes are going to save you a lot of time in terms of animating your character. Now, these would be more for things like creating a smile, creating a blink. You don't want to animate the controls of a facial rig consistently over a period of time for animation, simply because it's just going to take too long. So you would generally use those blend shapes to create, like I said, smiles, blinks, so that you can keyframe that animation fairly quickly and basically get your animation blocked out. So let's go ahead here and take a look at this, and I just want to go ahead and duplicate my model here so I can go ahead and create our blend shape. And it should be noted that whenever you duplicate something to make a blend shape inside of Maya, you don't want to freeze the transformations, center the pivot, or clear the history, simply because if you do that, you're going to get double transformations on your models whenever you are adding those blend shapes into the system. Okay, so let's come up here and let's just go ahead and morph this a little bit here. Well, I'll just try to morph this just a little bit. I mean, nothing too major, just so that you can see that our blend shape is going to be created here. Okay, so let's just go ahead and create our object, or select our object, select our blend shape. Okay, and we'll just call this test, and we will go ahead and hit create. We'll come up here to window, animation editors, okay, blend shape, and now when I move this control, you're going to see that our blend shape is going to morph back into the object that we wanted it to have. I sort of selected those wrong. Okay, so let's just go ahead and do that again, and we will go ahead and just select this one, select what is going to be our blend shape here. Okay, select our blend shape, select our original, come into our blend shape, create it, and now you're going to see where this mesh is going to turn out like this, and you can see that our blend shape can be a very, very powerful system inside of Maya, okay, where you can basically morph it into any shape that you want. Now let's go ahead here and delete these off, and I want to clear some history off of this model. Okay, we'll go back into our animation shelf here. Your lattice deformer is basically like a big box around your mesh, and it's going to allow you to sort of warp it into anything that you want, and it's going to allow you to sort of morph the geometry any which way that you want. So let's say you have a car that you want to eventually turn into a cartoon car. You can just simply apply a lattice deformer to it, and then just modify that lattice deformer into any shape that you would actually want. Okay, so let's come up here and let's apply a lattice deformer here. Okay, and we will just go ahead and hit create, and we're gonna just edit some adjustments here on the right hand side. I'm just gonna put 5 divisions on all sides here. Now if I right click and hit lattice point and just grab a few lattices, you're gonna see where you're gonna be able to modify that geometry, and you can sort of do whatever you want to it. Okay, so you can see where you're going to have a lot of control over the underlying geometry here with a lattice, and it's going to be fairly easy and fairly simple to actually go ahead and morph your geometry in any way that you want. But it should also be noted that the lattice is actually going to be fairly powerful in terms of animation too. So let me go ahead and just move some of these down here. Okay, so say you want your original model, you know, to be what it was here, as the pants are, you know, looking like they originally were whenever I imported them. But let's say that you want to animate something through something, and you want your mesh to actually conform to a shape, sort of like an X-Men, where it's going to be able to morph through something. So you would just basically set a key, okay, and then move your mesh through it, through the lattice deformation tool, and then back through, and you can see where that's going to be a fairly powerful tool to go ahead and create some lattice deformations to your model. Okay, so let's just go ahead and delete that lattice. Okay, your soft modification tool works similar to the sort of like the soft mod tool. If we go ahead and select vertices and hit B on our model, it's going to work similar to this, but instead of me just being able to grab a portion of the mesh, if we go ahead and hit our cluster deformation tool, it's going to add this little C, and now that cluster is going to stay on those vertices permanently until I clear the history or freeze the transformations on the mesh. This is also fairly powerful in terms of whenever you're creating splines for your character, you would actually add clusters to a joint chain, and this is how you would actually be moving your spline on your characters. Okay, so let's just come back here and jump back a few steps, and I'm going to go ahead and delete that C off of our character mesh there. Okay, your jiggle deformer, for lack of a better example, is sort of going to work like boob jiggle. So let's say you had a character that had boobs and was running down a street or something. You would add simply a jiggle deformer to her chest, so that whenever she was running, her chest would actually jiggle while running. That's probably the best way to go ahead and describe it. Or also like something like Jello. If you were moving Jello back and forth, if you applied a jiggle deformer to that mesh, it would actually work sort of wiggly, so it would give you a decent jiggle, and if you went and adjusted some of the parameters, you would actually get a good jiggle in terms of animation inside of Maya here. Let's take a look at our skeleton tab here. Okay, your joint tool, and this is important because in terms of rigging a character, you have to add joints to your character. and then you would just simply skin those joints to your mesh, which would allow you to rig it and then move your mesh. So let's go ahead and just click our joint tool here. Okay, and it should be noted that you don't want to go ahead and draw your joints in your perspective view. You always want to try to draw your joints, whether it be in the front view, the top view, or the side view, because if you tend to draw them in the in the perspective view, there's no guarantee that they're actually going to stay in the spot that you actually want to draw them. Okay, so let's just jump here into our front view, and let's just draw out our joints real quick. And I'm going to draw out some here for the leg. Oops, and I misplaced that one. Okay, and I'll draw one out here for the knee and one for the ankle. And we're going to go ahead and mirror this joint over. Okay, so we're also taking a look here at the mirror joint function. So let's say that this joint's name is joint 3. Okay, and we're going to search for joint 3, and we'll replace it with joint new. Okay, so everything that says joint 3 is going to change to joint new. We want to mirror it in the YZ axis, as you can see here. Okay, and now you can see where we replaced that joint 3 with joint new, and then it's going to be joint 4 and joint 5 and so on. So let's go ahead and move these into place here. I'm just going to x-ray my joints real quick. Okay, and this is okay. For demonstration purposes, this is fine. So let's just go ahead and parent these to our root joint. Now I'm just simply going to grab the main tip of the joint roots here, okay, and then hit P so that these get parented to that joint system. Okay, and let's go ahead here and skin our model real quick. Come up here to bind skin. Smooth bind is basically just giving you a smooth binded option to your character. You can always use interactive skin bind, which works similar to some of the plugins that are out there for Maya. One in particular would be the setup machine, as you can see I have here. So let's just go ahead and skin bind this. Rigid bind would be more for things like hard surface items. So let's just go ahead here and smooth bind our character mesh, and you can see where our mesh is now binded to those joints. Okay, but you can see where some of that information just isn't working correctly. Okay, specifically when we move the joints here on the right hand side, the mesh on the left is actually moving, and that's not something we would actually want. Okay, so let's go ahead and rename this joint new to something like joint test. Okay, and let's come up here and select our mesh. We'll come up with the skin, edit smooth skin. And we're going to go ahead here and paint some weights for our character. And let me just go ahead and move that out of the way real quick. Okay, and we'll take joint 3. And we wouldn't want any influence on the left side here, or on the right side of the character. So we would have to just basically come into, say, something like replace. And we're going to replace the weights that are on that character mesh. Okay, so now that the weights on the character are only going to be affected on this side where it would be white. You can always come in here and change your map type to a colored map so you can see it a little bit better, but I tend to paint my weights on a black and white map so that I know exactly where those weights are being painted. You could also add more influence to your object, but you don't want to paint it on something like 1. Painting it with an influence of 1 is like way too high. You want to paint it in small increments. So 0.1 is usually the best option, whether it be 0.1 or 0.2. You want to try to keep that level small. Okay, so we'll just come in here and paint a little bit of weights on our character, and now you can see where we're gonna get a pretty good adaptation for our weights here. Okay, so let's just come back into our rotate tool, and now we will just simply rotate there, and you can see where we get a fairly good adaptation of the weights here, as you can see. Now, it should also be noted that when animating, you won't necessarily animate from the joint rigs. You'll animate with things called control curves. Okay, and these sort of work in conjunction with, let's say, our our IK system inside of Maya. Now, your IK system are similar to human joints. So let's come in here and take a look at our tool. Okay, and I need to just move this out of the way again. Your rotate plane, or I'm sorry, your single chain solver here is more like the ball on your foot, where it's going to be able to sort of move up and down and left and right. Okay, and your rotate plane solver is basically going to work more like a elbow or a knee joint. And this is what we're going to go ahead and actually put in here. Is I'm going to put in the IK rotate plane solver. So let's select the top joint, select the bottom joint here, and you can see that we get this little IK handle here. Okay, now if I went and moved this and moved it up, you can see where the knee would actually be going out the wrong way, and this is because there is no pull vector constraint on this IK handle and joint. Okay, so we would need to actually go ahead and create an IK handle, and I'm just going to grab a rigging curve here real quick, and let me just go ahead and place this, and I'll go ahead and scale it down. Should be noted too that you're going to need to clear the history and freeze the transformations on this object if you're using it as a pull vector constraint, simply because if you don't, when you go to apply your pull vector constraint, it's not going to be too good. So it's just going to sort of go out of control. So let's go ahead and select our control curve and our IK pull vector handle there, and we'll just go ahead and add our pull vector. And now you can see where that sort of morphed the mesh, and that's just because I didn't have it placed correctly. But you can see where we're going to have our knee control actually moving. Okay, so let's come up here and let me go ahead and just grab our IK handle there, and I'll move it up. And this will give you a better example. If we went and moved this, you can see where our knee is going to have a little bit more control here. Okay, so let's just go ahead and place all this stuff back here. Just jump back a few steps and just make sure that there's no rotates here. Okay, yeah, we're good. So we'll just go ahead and unbind our mesh here and sort of just delete everything out of the scene. Take a look here real quick at our IK spline handle tool. Now this would be for things like your spines on your character. So let me go ahead and draw a spine real quick, or something that would sort of indicate a spine. And if you hold down shift when you draw your joints, you can basically snap to the grid. Okay, so let's go ahead and have that. Come up here and just select our IK spine handle tool here. So we'll select the top and then select the bottom, and you can see where if we tried to move this IK, we're not necessarily going to be able to, because there's no clusters on the curve inside of Maya here. So we need to come in here, and I'll just simply turn off the joints. Okay, we'll turn off the IK handles, and you can see where we have this little curve inside of Maya, which is our sort of clustered curve without the clusters on it. So we need to add a cluster to this curve. So I'm just going to come up here to edit curve, selection, cluster curve, and it adds a cluster at each point that's actually on that curve. Okay, so now if I go ahead and bring back my joints, go ahead and bring back my IK handle and try and select one of these clusters, you can see where, if I can actually select it here, and I'll just simply do this through the outliner. Okay, you can see where we're going to have a decent amount of control in that spine, which would work for, you know, spines of our character. Okay, so let's go ahead here and delete some of this stuff out of the scene. because we're not necessarily going to be using it here. Your remove joint system is basically going to remove joints from the joint chain individually. Okay, so let's come in here and grab our joint chain real quick. And we're not necessarily going to use the pants there. We'll just go ahead and draw a joint chain real quick. Nothing particular. Okay, so now if I go ahead here and select the joint and hit remove joint, you're going to see where it's going to remove that joint from the joint chain. Okay, or if we come in here and hit disconnect joint, it's going to disconnect the one joint from the other joint, as you can see there. Okay, we took a look at our mirror joint, but let's go ahead here and connect our joints back. So we'll just hit connect joint, and now you can see where it has remade that connection, but it also gives you sort of an extra one in there, and you can just go ahead and hit delete there, and now we have the joint chain basically reconnected. Okay, so let's take a look here under our skin menu. I'm trying to move this down here a little bit. Your bind skin, we obviously took a look at that whenever we were binding our skin mesh to our joints. You can also detach that skin mesh from your joint system. Your bind pose is typically what you're rigging in. So if your character's standing inside of a T-pose, that would necessarily be your T-pose, or your bind pose whenever you're actually rigging a character. You want to try for the most part to rig inside of a T-pose, simply because it's going to be easier to get it to be rigged correctly. If you rig in, say, with your character's arms down or something, it's not necessarily going to be super hard. It can be done, but it's just easier if you try to rig inside of a T-pose for a character. Okay, let's take a look here at our edit smooth skin and our edit rigid skin. They both work very similar to each other, but the smooth skin here is more for painting your weights on your character. Say if you wanted to export your skin weight maps and then re-import those skin weight maps after you've made more changes to your model's geometry, if you need to. Mirror skinning weights, you can simply just paint weights on one side and then just mirror those weights over to the other side, just as long as your joint chains are similar on each side of the character. You can do this individually as well, using, say, something like the weight hammer or the copy skin weights tab. And I think that might be enough here to take a look at our skin weights here, or our smooth skin. The character here, for the character sets, this would be more for something like animation. So if you were animating a character, and instead of creating a bunch of different scenes per animation, you can do that animation all in one scene. You'll just would basically have to create clips for that animation, and then you could simply just export those animations out and render those animations individually for, you know, whatever you're doing, whether it be games or movies. Okay, so that's a look at our animation set for the most part. It's a basic introduction to our animation tab. In the next lesson, we'll come back and continue working. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys.